Well, as I've returned from my time of paternity leave these last 4 weeks, I've had a lot of time to think about the very nature of rest. This church so kindly availed me and my family 4 weeks of time to rest, at least from vocational labor. We did some domestic labor, I had a baby and are still getting that going, but nonetheless had some time to think about rest, did some reading on that. So that's really the subject of this morning's preaching as well. We're going to be in Mark chapter 1, verse 35 to 39. Mark 1, 35 to 39. And I have a little story connected to this, another time that I remember in my life. And I remember this viscerally. I remember this like it was yesterday. I remember exactly where my hand was on the wheel of this truck that I was driving. It was in the middle of the semester in seminary, back when I was at Dallas, and I had tests to study for. I remember I could see the calendar. You know how you can see your academic calendar in your head, especially if you're in grad school? You just see your future laid out in dates. I had that clearly in my mind as I was driving down the road. I had more work for the school itself as the senior fellow of spiritual formation than I had ever taken on. They had just asked me to do some new things that I had no idea how to do, but I smiled and said yes, and that's why I was in this truck headed out of Dallas. And I was supposed to be this spiritual guy doing spiritual things with grace and ease, or so I felt. I thought that was the expectation. And here I was on the job. I was headed down to Houston, Texas, to go and give a training to other seminary students on the dangers of burnout. That was the title of the talk that I was supposed to be giving at this extension site of the school to other students who likely were just as burned out as I was. And there was only one problem. As I was reviewing the notes for this presentation, I said to myself, I have all those symptoms. I am burned out. How am I supposed to go down here and talk to these poor, unfortunate souls who I know very well have all the same symptoms as me? I started to ask the question, what is burnout? What is that? I went back and I actually dug up that presentation this week and I looked at what I was charged with saying. Well, according to the presentation that I was headed out to give, burnout is not simply about being tired. It's not. It isn't the kind of thing that you can fix with a week off or with 2 weeks off. One of the experts on the topic, Dr. Michelle Picorni, she writes that burnout is a multi-faced condition comprised of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, which is seeing yourself and others as tasks rather than people, and a sense of reduced personal accomplishment. You just can't seem to get your feet under you anymore. Another expert writing on the topic says that burnout represents an erosion of your values, of your dignity, of your spirit, and eventually of your will. In short, it is an erosion of the human soul. That's what it feels like. You could say that I was tired at this time, but that would not have been the half of it. In all the hustle and bustle of my work and my school life, I had been burning the candle of my own soul at both ends. My grades were looking very good, but my life was looking even better on paper. But my wife, Lauren, knew that my soul was in disrepair. She lives with me. She can see the reality. She would say this to me every day: you can't go on like this forever. When are you going to change? She would say. You must rest, she would remind me. And she wasn't talking about getting more sleep. Maybe you recognize this condition. Maybe you know it too well. Because the great need of our soul, not just our mind and our body, is rest. If you're anything like me, you too have pushed the boundaries of your humanity and you've given out far more than you ever had to give. You've mortgaged yourself. You know what it's like to push on from a place of yawning spiritual deficit. And really, if I'm here to give any message today, it's just one visceral message to receive from God, to see in the life of Jesus, is this. I'm here to tell us all today that Jesus, the one whom we are emulating and relying upon, he sat down a long time ago. He sat down. He's done. And because of where he is seated, he calls you and I to step in toward him and to rest a while. You and I need renewal, and Jesus shows us how. And like so much of what he's teaching, as I studied this, we'll find that what he teaches about rest is paradoxical. It's the opposite of what you might think, and yet so clear once you see it from his vantage point. This morning in Mark 1:35-39, we're going to see a snapshot from Jesus' own life and ministry, from the season when he was maybe at his busiest as a person, as we would understand. We'll see a day in the life of the one who demonstrates the right way to be human, even in the midst of busyness. We'll see what Jesus must teach us about ourselves and about the rest that God has for us. As we step into the text this morning, we will see the first paradox of rest is this one. It's that going out is getting in. Going out is getting in. Next, we'll see the second paradox is that giving more is getting enough. Giving more is getting enough. What does that mean? And finally, we'll consider together the things to bear in mind as we remember the reality of rest. Let's read verse 35 of Mark chapter 1. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and he went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said to them, "Let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out." And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. A short text today, but I think a very deep one we'll see. The first paradox that Jesus models for us about the reality of rest is what I would call going out is the real getting in. Going out is getting in. Oddly enough, Jesus shows us that being human involves a constant movement between two poles. Hopefully you've noticed this in your life, or maybe you've discovered this, but he models it perfectly. A pattern of going out in order to get in again. In the first 34 verses of Mark's gospel, we see that Jesus has been very busy. In the first 34 verses alone, Jesus has done 7 things. And count them. I would be tired after doing half of one of these things. He's done all 7. He's been publicly heralded by John the Baptist as maybe the most important person to have ever lived based on what John is saying about him. So he's got some public pressure. He's been baptized by John. He's been publicly baptized and affirmed by the Father. The Father has spoken and said, "This is my beloved Son." He has been privately tempted in the desert by the devil. So the devil's put all of his energy and resources into trying to take down the second Adam before he can even get his ministry underway. He says, okay, there's a chance here for a new Adam. I better get to work. I better tempt this one and stop his ministry from happening. Jesus has faced that level of temptation already. Coming out of that victorious, Jesus has begun to preach publicly. Now his ministry is really moving. He's speaking publicly about the kingdom of God. Then he has called out his first disciples to follow him. He's made his asks of others. And having done all this, he has healed a man with an unclean spirit. He has performed an exorcism. And as a result of that, the 7th thing is the biggest of them all. He's healed many more from disease and spiritual oppression. Everyone knows who he is, or at least the people on the street sense that this is somebody that they should be in connection to. That's 7 things that would dry me out, that maybe would dry you out. Jesus has been busy. He's been spending himself physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And just because Jesus is the Son of God, it does not mean that he is any less human. He's completely human, just as we are. He has to be. And these things take a toll on him. Now, it's easy to forget that Jesus has this aspect of our humanity in common. Even when we're smack dab in the middle of the will of God, we can and do get tired. You should notice that about Jesus. He's perfectly human and perfectly God, and yet he gets tired. He has these moments where he gets depleted in some sense. It's a feature of human life. As Jesus stops to take stock of all that he's been doing in the first part of his ministry, he faces a truth that we all must face as well. It's this: depletion and dislocation are inconvenient truths about human life. He has to face them, just as we do. Even Jesus' human life. Maybe you're working 45 or 50 hours a week. I know some of you. Holding down household bills, or maybe month after month and year upon year, that's what you've been walking through. Maybe you're raising up little kids who can neither thank you, right? No, we didn't get any thanks last night. I'm looking at a couple of young faces in here. They can't thank you. They can't wipe their own behind. They can't feed themselves. They can't do anything. Maybe you're in that season. Maybe you're grinding away in a library for an exam, or another exam, or another exam, or another assignment for years upon years. I know some of you watching, that might be your place. Or maybe you have found that even your retirement years are far fuller than you would have imagined. Hey, I thought I was supposed to be on a break. I'm working harder than I've ever worked in a different context. No matter what you're doing, when you rise to meet the challenge of your days before God and others, we will get tired. We will experience exertion. And before long, we may even experience exhaustion. Even as we are dead center in the will of God, sometimes we experience depletion. We'll go to stand on the gas and find that there isn't anything there. And here's the critical moment. If we keep going as though the gas light isn't on, if we decide to try to run on empty, eventually we experience dislocation. We move from depletion to dislocation. This is when talks about burnout become pertinent. We become a shell of our former selves. We keep going as though we have more behind the counter than we put on display. But the opposite is true. We are living out of a public persona that we no longer are in private. In short, the lights are on, but nobody's home. I can remember, I'll tell you what this looks like in my own life, in this ministry. At various points, I've comforted myself by the thought that if I have complete notes, if I have a certain number of words, if I have a shirt that is not wrinkled, and if my face is shaved, no matter what else went wrong, I will get through Sunday morning. I've told myself that before, right? Those are the three things people can see. If I don't have enough to say, if my shirt is jacked up, and if I look like I crawled out from under the house, those are the three things. That's how I know that it's time to stop and say, damn, the jig is up here. We're making mistakes related to burnout that need to be addressed. We're moving from depletion into dislocation. Right? Maybe you felt that. As Jesus lives and serves within the will of his Father, he certainly would have experienced depletion. But what you're seeing here is that he does something interesting. He's unwilling to allow that depletion to become utter dislocation. Unwilling to let it happen. He chooses to go out in order that he might get in again. Get in with who? Get in again, in touch with his Father, and therefore in touch with himself as the Son of his Father. It's essential to him. It says in verse 35, rising early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed, he leaves, and he went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. Because depletion and dislocation are these constant dangers in human life, Jesus models the appropriate response for human beings. And what is it? Jesus models that when he's up against this problem, he decides to move toward dependence. He goes and depends again on his Father. Dependence involves two moves for us to memorize. This is where we want to go this morning. Two moves that can become muscle memory for your soul. Things just to have deep down that you know are true. The first is an inward movement away from others. Jesus is depleted. He steps up to the line of dislocation, and he makes his first move. It's an inward movement away from others. But the second movement is an upward movement toward God alone. So it's in and it's up. Jesus models both of these moves right here in this text. The inward movement away from others is a withdraw kind of a move. You catch this? Now, we need this kind of move whether we can admit it or not. You know how you're headed in a bad direction when you can't admit that this is the move, right? You have a bunch of justifications as to why you couldn't withdraw or you couldn't step away even for a moment. And if you're like me, here's what we need to admit. We are limited, and we will find it out. Our bodies will demonstrate it for us at some point. As we go through our lives collecting external demands and discharging even faithful duties, we expend more and more energy even as the burdens remain the same. Think of it this way. If you're in the gym, you've experienced this. You have a certain amount of energy to expend lifting a particular set of weights over your head. You know how many reps you have in you, right? You have some idea. Let's say you can do 10 reps of a certain weight on the bench. Now, is the weight any less on the 11th rep? No, it's exactly the same. It doesn't care. It's just 200 pounds, the same way every time. But the energy that you have left to expend it is certainly less. As a result, eventually any burden will become too much. It doesn't have to be a big one, right? Don't look at your life and say, well, I'm not doing anything crazy hard. I should be able just to do this forever, right? I'm not a weak person. I can push through. I'm not doing that much. It doesn't matter. It's actually about the duration of it going on indefinitely. Eventually, you'll be depleted. One must walk away from the burden for a time. In the same way, we must periodically withdraw from the demands and duties of life, right and good as they may be. Jesus literally goes to a desolate place far away from those who might bring another need, who might bring another demand, who might bring another request. This morning I woke up and my poor wife had been up since, I think, about 3, working with our little girl, and she had prioritized my sleep last night, so it was my night to sleep. So I slept through the night. I got like 7 or 8 hours, and I woke up and she had not slept much at all. And it was one of those conversations where, well, are we going to make it to church or are you not? What's the deal? How do we want to do that this morning? And it was this thing where I could just see on her face, I had to take over so that she could have 40 minutes or so. It's all I had to give, but it had to be given, absolutely. It didn't matter if there was any consequence to that. That's where we were this morning as a family. And so we had to do that. She had to step away for a period of time. Now notice she couldn't do it completely alone. There has to be somebody there. It assumes that you live in community, that somebody else can hold the fort for you for a minute. That's part of the aspect of really what the Bible assumes, that we would be living in such a community, that people would be able to help. It assumes that you'd be willing to help if you've got the energy and someone else is depleted. It's both a calling to us and a commandment to help one another in this way. At this point in Jesus' ministry, he would have had lots of emerging titles coming from outside of him, right? Coming from outside. People are already calling him teacher. They're already calling him healer. Some are crying out miracle worker. Some are already wondering and whispering Messiah. But there's one title that came logically prior to them all, and it is Son. Though he is depleted, Jesus is unwilling to become dislocated from his deepest and most primary identity, for all the rest are going to flow from his status as the Son. Jesus moves physically away from others to remember who he is apart from all others, who he is apart from others, and who he is in all eternity. He is the Son of the Father. So this is the first move of dependence. You see it here. It's an inward move away from others that we might remember who we are alone before God, from whom we receive our primary identity and our relationship to all else, including those who make demands. What does Jesus do once he has moved inward? His next move is upward. It says that he prays when he's there. Notice this. Jesus is not getting away from it all so that he can find himself again in some self-interested search. This is not some form of private navel-gazing that Jesus just occasionally decides to claim his time, right? It's Jesus' day off, y'all. Thank you, right? It's not as simple as that. He doesn't necessarily go golfing. No, he gets alone, not to remain alone, not to prioritize himself for the sake of himself, but to be with God the Father. That's what he knows is going to reestablish him and renew him. Just last week, I had a reminder of the importance of this. I'd been in the house for a couple of days straight. We both had, as Lauren and I have been home on leave, and I woke up one morning and I felt that I was already tired. But it was not in my body, it was somewhere deeper. And as I made my coffee, I heard the Spirit say to me this, no phone, no phone. Just go throw the phone, right? No phone. No computer, no YouTube. And it was interesting because it was this moment where both of the kids were asleep, and so I was alone. I wanted to do what I wanted to do with my wild and free 20 minutes that I might have had. But there it was, on the table, my Bible, right there, right in front of me. Everyone else was asleep, so instead of taking the 15 or 20 minutes to entertain myself in a mindless way, I opened up the Bible to the Psalter, and I spent the little time that I had with the Lord. And I'm like literally embarrassed to tell you how much of a difference those 15 minutes made for me. The whole rest of the day was different. Just a very short moment of connection with the Lord that was deliberate, and I actually experienced reconnection to God, even though I was physically tired. Jesus is showing us that dependence upon God is not about perfection, but it is about a pattern. It's an inward move away from others and an upward move toward God in prayer. Furthermore, Jesus is perfecting the pattern, but he did not pioneer it. Jesus is not the first to do this. Moses, Daniel, Mary, and countless others all laid aside their normal labor to regularly enjoy intimate dependence upon the Lord. It was their going out from the business of the world that kept them in touch with the ruler of the world and with their work within it. As Christians, we experience depletion and dislocation even as we live and serve in the world. We are called to regularly rest, to reset in some way with God in moments of private prayer and dependence. And they could be very short, right? They could be just the amount of time it takes to move from the garage to the shower, right? It could be a very simple thing. It could be on your commute. This doesn't have to be, a spiritual retreat that somehow you carved out for yourself. It can be very simple. And in fact, the pattern suggests that it is. So the first paradox about rest that Jesus demonstrates is that somehow that act of going out is what it takes to get back in. Depletion happens, but dislocation shouldn't, because dependence is the answer. A pattern of dependence is the answer. Now, the second paradox about rest that Jesus demonstrates here is even more paradoxical for me, at least. It's that giving more is getting enough. Seems impossible. Giving more is getting enough. What does that mean? How does that work? Well, to understand, we need to grapple with the temptation and with the truth that are both right here in the narrative. Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him, and they said to him, look at this phrase, everyone is looking for you. And he said to them, "Let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out." The first temptation that Jesus faces is the temptation to believe a particular lie. And this is the lie that's right on offer for him. The lie is that living on the validation from popularity or external demands will satisfy his inner needs. There's a presentation right there. Jesus, everyone's looking for you. You're important. Step into it. Step into it. And get your validation from that. Step into that cycle of external validation. But look at what Jesus hears. He hears everyone's looking for you, and he recognizes it as a powerful temptation. You know that feeling when you walk into the office or you get the call. "Oh, thank goodness you're here. So and such needs you." That's a powerful feeling. It's a good feeling. I'm learning the power of that feeling afresh in my own life as dad. I come home and my son says, "Daddy, help Ezra. Daddy, help Ezra." And I hear it again and again. I love, "Daddy, help Ezra." And I love to help. I love to be needed. We all do. It's very filling to us. But it is not ultimate. Living as if it were ultimate is a recipe for disaster. What happens when the calls don't come anymore? What happens when the external validation from wherever it's coming is suddenly gone? What happens when you and I are no longer in demand from others? What then? Where will our hearts go then? For some of you, I would imagine that even age has brought this temptation out into the light as the folly that it always was. Even as I move in sort of to the middle stage of my own life, I can see the way in which my relationship to others is something that can change very quickly. Very quickly. Relationships and things that I was depending upon for my identity and myself, they can go away just like that. Somebody moves, a relationship falls apart, God forbid somebody passes on, and the architecture of your life, if you were depending upon it externally, shifts so fast it's hard to adjust. So depending upon the approval of others is so tempting because it feels so good. Everyone's looking for you. But it's a moving target. It's shifting sand. Even depending upon your own approval of yourself is tempting. Jesus could have said, "Well, these people aren't looking for me, but those people over there, they're looking for me because I'm something. Maybe if I just play confident, I will be confident, depending upon your own approval. That's it, I'll think it into being." Right? No. If we look to others for validation, we will not find the satisfaction and validation that we ultimately need. If we look to ourselves, we won't find it. Because the temptation is just that. It is a temptation toward folly. It's a self-defeating cycle that's tempting us in. So what does Jesus model? "Let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out." Jesus dodges the temptation and he moves forward in the truth. And what is the truth as it pertains to Jesus here? The truth is that living on purpose in the power of God is what fulfills. Living on purpose, deliberately, in the power of God is what fulfills. And in the purpose of God. Here's what's happening. Jesus knows who he is. He knows what he has been sent to do. And he operates out of that identity and that mission regardless of the external circumstances and regardless of the temptations, as valid or tempting as they may be. Because do the crowds offer approval? He already has approval. He knows who he is. Do others bring an agenda? Certainly they do, but Jesus already has one. Rather than allowing depletion to lead to dislocation, Jesus is modeling dependence. He knows that going out has been the key to getting back in. And now Jesus is ready to go back to his God-given work. And in doing so, he's modeling how giving more is what it means to get enough. Because God gives to us that which we are to give. He has given it to us so that we would give it out. And the key here is that we can't give what we don't have. We receive in order to give again. Jesus is playing it tight to that truth. He's not willing to exchange that for something else. He's only going to give what the Father has given him to give. Just as Jesus basks in the love and approval of his Father and then returns to the world to bring that love and approval to others through him, so we have the divine love and approval in Jesus to offer to others. All others who are still trapped in a restless cycle of external validation or of external approval, right? It's a tiring way to be. God has given to us that we might give to others. I think of St. Francis who prayed, "Let me be a channel of your peace, God." Think of the people in your life who need peace. And if you just wanted to grab them by the shoulders and shake them and just say, "Calm down, it'll be okay." Why would it be okay? Right? Why? It would be okay to the extent that they were going to rely upon Christ, in whom all is made well. It's not really true that it will be okay apart from that, but it is completely true that if they will rely upon Christ, they will experience rest. It's in this kind of giving that we find that we have had enough. What could be more satisfying than to be spent for God's gospel? What could be more worthy of the efforts of your life or of my life? As Christians, we resist the temptation to rely upon the approval of others or upon our approval of ourselves, and instead we depend upon the approval of God to fulfill our deepest needs and then to bestow our greatest gifts to give to other people. Guarantee you, at the end of your life, when people think about you and they think about what's positive about you, what they like about you, if they're being honest, you'll be able to trace what they like about you to what God gave them through you. Like if you had hospitality toward them, God was hospitable to you and did that in your heart, and then you did it for them. If you were generous to them, if you were loving to them, if you forgave them when nobody else did, if you were there with them, if you were present to them, all of those things are just God doing that through you in their life. And that is what it means to live on purpose, and therefore to get enough by giving more. Not more that you generated, but more that you stewarded to them. That's the great adventure of our lives. Getting out is getting in. Giving more is finally getting enough. These are the paradoxes that Jesus models for us as we consider the reality of rest. What are we going to take with us to remember? Let's boil it down to just a few words, watchwords, to carry with us. The first watchword for remembering the reality of rest, I would think, is to withdraw. You can't get through this text without seeing that withdraw is a key word. Withdraw from others for your sake and for theirs. And crucially, it does not have to be much, but it does have to be. Say no to unbroken activity, even if it is for 15 seconds between tasks. It can be very small. It's about the pattern, not about perfection. Withdraw from others for your sake and theirs. It doesn't have to be much, but it does have to be. Second of all, worship. Worship privately as well as publicly. You're here this morning worshiping publicly, but most of our life is lived in private. So we should say yes to unbroken prayer and praise. That's what Jesus is doing here. He's been working publicly, but he goes back to worship and to commune privately. He does not allow that process to be disturbed. He withdraws and he worships, he communes. Withdraw, worship, and finally work. But work in a different way. Work from the fulfillment that God provides, rather than for the fulfillment that work promises. Work from the fulfillment God has already provided, rather than for the fulfillment that work promises. That's, I think, one of the great dangers of our time and of our context. I read it this week in a column where someone penned it, workism. W-O-R-K-I-S-M. Workism is on the rise, right? This idea that that whether we would admit it to ourselves or not, there is a sense in which our identity is wrapped up in our ability to produce or in what we do for the economy and for the economy even of our own household, that our vocation, whatever it may be, is where our life is. But the gospel cuts right against that. It says to receive your life rather than to achieve your life. So work takes on a different meaning. We work from the fulfillment that God provides rather than for the fulfillment that more work would promise. Because burnout isn't noble. You ever believe that lie? If I just get busier, I'm more important. It's not true. Burnout isn't noble, nor is it necessary. May we regularly seek our renewal in the one who offers rest for our souls. That's Jesus' great invitation. Would he make it if it weren't the honorable thing to respond to? Would he say, come and lay your burdens down, cast your cares upon me, pray to me, calm down, relax, if he was saying secretly, these are some of the weakest people I've ever seen? No, that is what our real life is hid in him. He wants us to come and to rely upon him, to receive rest for our souls. It's why he has come. As we stepped into the text this morning, we saw that the first paradox of rest is that going out is getting in. And then we saw that giving more is finally getting enough. And we considered together the things to bear in mind, those watchwords, as we remember the reality of rest. Let's pray. Father, wake us up. What are we doing? Running around like rats in a cage. Too often, that is the condition of our hearts. Too often. And to the burned out heart, Lord, it's hard even to hear you say, come, drink, sit a while. It feels unbelievable to us, Lord. How could it be? And yet it is so. Because you have afforded it, Lord. You have made it real. You have done the work that we might receive the blessing. That is the gospel. Lord Jesus, help us to rely upon your finished work, to receive our lives, to enter into your rest, to do so by faith rather than by more work. Let us step into your pattern of life rather than our pattern of drudgery or of depersonalization or of burnout, Lord. Help us to receive from you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.